Hello, in this video we'll see the basic concept of exempt supply, non-taxable supply and schedule 3 transaction under GST. Before going into the details, let's first see what are the types of exemption under GST. There are 3 types of exemption under GST. One is absolute exemption. Absolute exemption means unconditional exemption. Your product is mentioned, rate is 0. You don't need to satisfy any condition. When there is an absolute exemption, assessee is not having any option not to avail the exemption. He has to take exemption. He cannot say that I don't want the exemption, I will continue to pay the tax and avail the input tax credit. No. Once there is an absolute exemption, assessee is not having an option not to avail it. He has to avail it. And there is a conditional exemption. Conditional exemption means what? Condition A, B, C. You satisfy the condition, there is no need to pay the tax at output side. And there is third category is an ad hoc exemption. By special order, they can exempt a certain type of transaction, which is called as an ad hoc exemption. Now come to the part of definition of exempt supply. This is defined in section 2, clause 47. Exempt supply means a supply. Exempt supply means a supply of goods or services or both which attract nil rate of tax or which are wholly exempt from payment of tax by way of exemption notification under section 11 of the CGST Act or section 6 of the IGST Act and include non-taxable supply. C. A supply which is taxable but carries nil rate of duty. Is it exempt supply? Yes, it is exempt supply. A supply which is taxable but it is wholly exempt. Wholly exempt means suppose your product is chargeable to tax in the GST at 18%. Notification says rate is 0. That means wholly exempt. However, if your product is chargeable to tax under GST at 18% and the notification says rate is 5%, then it is partially exempt. That is not a wholly exempt. That is not exempt. That is not an exempt supply. And it includes non-taxable supply also. So all 3 categories. Exempt supply means a supply which is not taxable, not leviable to tax. Supply which is taxable but wholly exempt from payment of tax. A supply which is taxable but carries nil rate of duty. But tell me friends, what about the transaction which is not a supply at all? Transaction, I didn't say supply. What about the transaction which is not a supply at all? Is it right to say that it is exempt supply? You should not commit a mistake by saying that a non-taxable supply is exempt supply. Therefore, a transaction which is not a supply at all is also a exempt supply. No, non-taxable supply is still a supply. A transaction which is not a supply is not an exempt supply. So schedule 3 transactions are neither supply of goods nor supply of services, are not exempt supply of. There is a difference between exempt supply and transaction 3, schedule 3 transactions. Then non-taxable supply. Non-taxable supply means again a supply which is not leviable to tax. Not leviable to tax, for example, alcoholic liquor for human consumption, petrol, diesel, gas, natural gas, petroleum products, etc. This is not leviable to tax. There is a supply, but it is not in the purview of GST. There is no levy under section 9 of the CGST Act on these products. Okay. Now why we are learning this exempt supply? What are the consequences of exempt supply? Consequences of exempt supply is twofold. Namely, don't pay tax. Your product is exempt, so on the supply of that product at the output side, don't pay tax. You are not paying tax on the output. So the second consequence is reversal of input tax credit. You are not paying tax on the output side. So whatever input tax credit you enjoyed, which culminates into that supply, please reverse the credit. So at input stage, don't avail the credit. At output stage, don't pay the tax. These are the consequences of exempt supply. Now friends, let's understand in a real sense what is exempt supply. In PKR ruling, Supreme Court held that exemption presupposes levy. When I say something is exempt, it means it is otherwise chargeable to tax. It is exempt from payment of tax. Exempt supply means there is a levy. Exemption presupposes levy. It is exempt from payment of tax. However, is it right to say non-taxable supply is also exempt supply? It is illogical because just now we say that exemption presupposes levy. When I say something is exempt, it means it is otherwise chargeable to tax. However, non-taxable supply is not leviable to tax. But the lawmakers has specifically made non-taxable supply as exempt supply. Let's take an example to understand what is the reason for including non-taxable supply in exempt supply. For example, if there is a dealer who is supplying petrol, that is non-taxable supply. He is having a space on, he has taken the space on rent. There is a GST, 18% GST on that rent. And along with petrol, he is selling some lubricant oil, which is chargeable to tax. It is not non-taxable. It is chargeable to tax. Now, that dealer needs to reverse the proportionate input tax credit in proportion to the turnover of petroleum product, petrol, and lubricant oil. Therefore, non-taxable supply are included in the exempt supply. Now coming to the next part, composite supply. The definition of composite supply is there is two or more taxable supply. Suppose I transport a milk from one place to another. Milk is a taxable supply, but exempt and carries why it is exempt? Because it carries nil rate of duty. Okay. Transportation is chargeable at 18%. So can you say that it is a composite supply? Yes, it is a composite supply because milk is a taxable supply. It is exempt from payment of tax. Therefore, it is a composite supply. On the transportation, there is no need to pay the tax separately because it will lose its existence and it will merge with the principal supply, which is a milk supply. On the other hand, suppose I transport alcohol from one place to another. Is it a composite supply? No, it is not a composite supply because alcohol is a non-taxable supply. Transportation is a taxable supply. So on transportation, you need to pay the tax separately. See, in a law, in many places, the word used is taxable supply. Some cases, the word used is taxable and exempt supply. When the word use is a taxable supply, it means both taxable and exempt supply. And whenever there is a word use, the taxable and exempt supply, there the meaning of taxable supply is in contradiction to the exempt supply. Other than exempt supply, you need to understand, you need to correctly interpret the law. Because when the word use is a taxable supply, it means taxable and exempt supply, because exempt supply is a subset of taxable supply. It's etched in our mind the antonym that opposite of taxable is exempt supply. No, exempt supply is a subset of taxable supply. So whenever there is a word taxable supply is used in the law, it means both taxable and exempt supply. And when there is a word use is, see section 17, word use is taxable and exempt supply. There the taxable supply means other than exempt supply. Now coming to the last part, which is schedule 3 transaction. Schedule 3 transactions are not an exempt supply. You should not commit a mistake saying that non-taxable supply is exempt supply, so schedule 3 transactions are also exempt supply. No, schedule 3 transactions are neither supply of goods nor supply of services. Non-taxable supply is still a supply, but schedule 3 transaction is not an exempt supply. It won't come even within the purview of being considered as supply. What is the consequence of exempt supply? What is the difference between exempt supply and schedule 3 transaction? In exempt supply, you need to reverse input tax credit, which is directly related to the exempt supply, and common credit. However, in case of schedule 3 transactions, there is no need to reverse the input tax credit. This is the difference between exempt supply and schedule 3 transactions. In schedule 3 transactions, there is no need to reverse the input tax credit. In exempt supply, you need to reverse the input tax credit, which is directly related, and as per rule 42, you need to reverse the common credit also. But in a schedule 3 transaction, there is no need to reverse the input tax credit. Okay, these are my contact details. There are many YouTube videos are available. Before going to the exam, please watch those videos. If you are having any questions relating to GST, you can mail me. My email ID is catusharji@gmail.com. My cell number is 8080980684. You can call me at between 9:30 to 10 p.m. Thank you.